All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Inclusion and Wellbeing Forum for May. We welcome everyone to the forum, and as always, we will be recording today's session and posting it on our YouTube over the coming days once we edit a little bit. Today's session is going to focus on supporting social and emotional needs and sensory needs and managing behaviour with lots of practical tips and tools from two expert practitioners, Fran and Kate from British School of Al Khabarat in Abu Dhabi, one of the most inclusive and best organised schools that I've been to. We hosted one of our forums down there and it was really, really wonderful. As always, practitioners and providers are all welcome. We ask that you not disclose any personal information, any names of students or schools. If you have any questions, please pop them into the chat and I can direct them to Fran and Kate. This is a free to attend forum, so we don't promote any materials or specific products or anything like that. It is simply to support the community and share best practices. We hope that you really enjoy the session, and I will hand over to Fran and Kate.
Hi, good afternoon. Right, just bear with me while I share the screen. Spoiler alert, I'm not the most technically minded person. We got it there. There we go. Okay. So we'll introduce ourselves. Our session this afternoon is all around emotional regulation and sensory processing. Kate, do you want to go first?
Yeah. Hi, I'm Kate Lewis. I'm the lead school counsellor at BSAC. There's just two of us.
Guys, can we zoom out a little bit because we can't see you, Kate. We want to see
you can't see me?
Yeah. If we push back.
Now?
Not quite there. No,
we're going to tilt it when we get going anyway.
Okay. Yeah, if you just squeeze in a bit.
That's funny because we can see
we can see ourselves on there.
Can anybody else not see us?
Oh, okay. Yeah, we've got you. Yeah.
Okay. So I'm the lead school counsellor at BSAC. We just have two counsellors for the whole school. I'm a psychotherapist from the UK. I've worked within the NHS. I've worked for health charities. I've worked with trauma. One of my specialisms is attachment. So that leads into a lot of what we're talking about today in terms of how we relate to each other, how we relate to our parents, how we relate to the world around us, and also CBT. So obviously I use a lot of CBT with the students here at BSAC. So yeah, that's me.
Hi, and I'm Fran. I know a few people on the call already. I'm a head of inclusion. I've started my career as a primary teacher in the UK, went into special ed, then went international and became head of inclusion. And my specialism really is more specifically autism, although it's all areas of inclusion, but I've done lots of work in classrooms with young people with autism. So I did that for 10 years, 8 in the UK and 2 years here at Al Khabarat. So that's kind of where the sensory part of it comes from. That's sort of my area of passion, area of expertise. And I'm the head of secondary inclusion at BSAC. We have 2 heads of inclusion, one primary, one secondary. So I do a lot of work now around access arrangements and supporting teachers to modify things for students in the secondary school. So that's us. We're going to sort of do this kind of thing as each of us is speaking. You wouldn't believe it. We're stood on a tissue box. So yeah, I think you're first.
Okay. So would anybody like to dare to raise a hand? I bet you don't feel very regulated about that. I bet you have a specific response about the thought of raising your hand in this forum. But would anybody like to raise a hand and tell me why I would put that there? The only constant is change. How does that relate to emotional regulation in our students? Anyone? How do I do this, Fran? Do I click?
Now I'm checking and there's nobody as yet.
Iman, no?
Iman, yeah.
Iman, if you're there, would you like to unmute yourself? No? No, okay. Okay, don't worry, guys. I won't take it personally. Okay, so the reason I put this is because emotional regulation is all about distress tolerance. And distress, suffering, change, all of these things are constant, and they are they're going to happen and they're unavoidable things. So when we're working with our children and our students at BSAC, we're not working to completely remove obstacles. We're not working to take the obstacles out of their way. We want to work for them to go through the obstacle, around the obstacle, navigate it any way they can, but we can't take the obstacles away. Basically, emotional regulation from our point today is about distress tolerance. It's about managing distress. All of us have different ranges of tolerances, and I'm going to talk to you about the window of tolerance in a little while. But it is how we manage change, distress, and how we are able to regulate ourselves. So, so the way we're looking at it today as well is it's not just about wobble seats, it's not just about fidgets, it's not about movement break, it's the why. Why is this child dysregulated? What is going on for them below the surface? So Fran has just disappeared. She's going on to the next slide.
I just remembered you just said movement breaks, and I remembered something I wanted to share later.
Okay, so we're going to talk about the why of what's happening, and we're going to speak about some neuroscience around the way we regulate our emotions and understanding how we can address the deeper needs of the student.
Okay, thank you. We're bitting and bobbing, so you're not getting fed up of just listening to one voice. So I think it's important, first of all, to talk about how closely Kate and I work together, how closely mental health is interconnected with inclusion. And I've just we've put some statistics on here because it's quite sobering, really, when you look at these things. So if you just read through these, like 54% of people with a learning disability also have a mental health problem. Children with learning disabilities are 4.5 times more likely to have a mental health problem than children without a learning disability. A third of adults with ADHD have a depressive disorder, major depression or something like that. 70% of individuals with autism have at least one comorbid psychiatric disorder. You know, these are really, really strong statistics. The correlation between inclusion and mental health is definitely there. So what we then did when I've been at BSAC for almost 2 years now, and Kate and I started working very closely together from the beginning, and are very strong, and we believe really strongly that the connections between inclusion and mental health support really need to be there to support our young people. And we actually did a bit of a deep dive on our numbers, and this is what we came up with. So this is just specific to our school. The crossover of students on the inclusion and having support from counselling. At Key Stage 3, 48% of our students at BSAC are also having counselling support. At Key Stage 4, it's 31% of students, and at Key Stage 5, it's 45% of students. We did this last academic year, but it's, you know, it will be similar. And that's really strong, isn't it? The correlation is definitely there. We do work very, very closely together, and helping our young people to have better mental health and have mental health support will then impact on their learning, and vice versa, because we know that if a young person's not happy, they're not going to learn, you know. So it's really, really important that we're supporting these things alongside each other when they're there. Okay, so this is what we call the iceberg. We've been through various different models of this. And Kate did this very fancy one at the weekend on. I don't know how you did this, but it looks very beautiful. It looks much more beautiful than the primitive one I had before. But when we think about the iceberg of sort of in terms of behaviour, and the iceberg's an analogy that's used by a lot of people for lots of different things, but we look at the bit on the top, the part of the iceberg that you see, is the smaller part, isn't it? And this is the words that we will sometimes hear as inclusion specialists from mainstream class teachers might be things like, well, that child isn't paying attention, they can't focus in class, they're naughty, they're rude, they're disengaged, they're disruptive, they're lazy. Those are the kind of words that, you know, I have heard said about inclusion students. And what I will always say is, but it's not about that, is it? That's what they might present like. But it's important to think about what's going on underneath the surface, and that's where the bigger part of the iceberg is. So this is the bit that's inside the child. Why? You know, if we can't just say that this child is naughty, this child hasn't got good focus and attention. We've got to think about why that is. Otherwise, we can't support them. We can't meet their needs. So we've got to look underneath. We might have things like unmet emotional needs. You know, if a child behaviour is all communicating something, isn't it? When children are giving us the undesired behaviour, it's trying to tell us something. It's probably a child who you know, is unhappy for some reason, but they're unable to articulate that in words, so they show us with their behaviour. You know, that's more often than not the case. So it could be unmet emotional needs, it could be behavioural needs, sensory needs, ADHD, you know, attentive or inattentive type. It could be that they're masking something, they're masking a learning need or something else. It can be the COVID hangover. You know, we hear that still now. We've got those young people that when they started school, they weren't even in school, they weren't in the classroom, you know, and those children are coming up towards the top of the primary school now. Or we could have learning needs that are diagnosed or undiagnosed. You know, there are lots of reasons why a child might present as being rude or being disruptive or being, you know, lazy, those words that we hear used. Other things that could factor into that could be things like safeguarding things, challenges at home. You know, there are many, many reasons for this behaviour. And as inclusion specialists, as educators, what we really need to be trying to do is figuring out what's going on underneath the iceberg, the big part underneath the water. What is going on there that's creating that behaviour that we're seeing in the classroom? Because that's the key to success for our young people. Yeah.
Okay, so with those unmet emotional needs, we really need to be considerate of ACEs. So the ACEs study was done with lots and lots of families around traumatic events that impact people. And the study was groundbreaking and very important for what we know or what we think we know about trauma. So when we have no ACEs, so ACEs can be all of these things over here. So with no ACEs, children typically have better emotional regulation and learning outcomes, and they're unlikely to need behaviour or academic interventions. Now, there's very few children that have no ACEs because ACEs are just part of life. So if we look at 3 or more ACEs, if I look at my own family, we've moved house, we've moved country, we've been through COVID, maybe we've had a loss in our family, maybe there's somebody been unwell in our family. Those are 3 ACEs. Maybe I just have 2 ACEs. It's actually normal for us to have ACEs. And it's not actually what happens sometimes, it's how it happens. It's those children that have gone through, some children we know, maybe they've gone through a parental separation and they've been okay. It's impacted them, but it's not been a significant had a significant impact on their life. However, some children, we know their whole family system does not have the resilience or the coping strategies in place. Perhaps mum is unwell, perhaps there's unemployment, perhaps there's mental health issues, so many different situations. Perhaps parents went through traumatic times. So our ability to respond to these ACEs as a family really impacts the degree to which they affect us. So there's no judgment here on how a family copes with things. We're looking at the evidence. And when we look with people with 3 ACEs or more, they're 3 times more likely to repeat a grade or face learning difficulties, and emotional and behavioural struggles often emerge at this time. Now, 4 ACEs is quite eye-opening. They're 5 times more likely to suffer from depression, 2 times more likely to have academic problems, and 4 times likely to engage in risky behaviours. Now, on the actual study, 50% of the children with 4 ACEs or more had learning difficulties, diagnosed learning difficulties. So whether we're looking at ACEs, whether we're looking at ADHD, whether we're looking at ASD, the impact on the brain can be very similar. So when our neurons fire together, they wire together. So as we're experiencing our life, we build up narratives and stories, and we learn how to cope with situations. And this is why this is so significant for us. So now, talking about ACEs and our ability to respond, we can talk about it in terms of the window of tolerance. And what I want you to notice about this, I want you to think about the people that you work with, the students that you work with, and think about their windows of tolerance. Think about children that have a really big window of tolerance, a small window of tolerance. Does it depend on what's happening in our life? I'll just show you this video. We're just going to watch it for 2 minutes.
The sound isn't coming through.
It just takes a couple of seconds, sorry.
The window of tolerance is a model which helps to understand the variable nature of an individual's capacity and ability to cope and function. We all have zones or ranges of optimal coping and functioning, as shown by the green band in the diagram. This is known as our window of tolerance. When an individual is within their optimal zone or window of tolerance, they are able to experience and tolerate thoughts and emotions, and they are able to cope with the ups and downs, opportunities and challenges of everyday life without much difficulty. They will be more able and likely to take in and process information, think logically, and make informed decisions and respond and behave in developmentally appropriate ways. Windows of tolerance, that is, the degree to which we can cope, will vary from person to person and will vary for each individual depending on what we are doing and what is happening around us. Those who have a narrow window of tolerance may feel as though their emotions are highly changeable or intense, which can be overwhelming and hard to cope with. Others with a wider window of tolerance may feel as though they experience less noticeable ups and downs, or that emotions are not frequently intense and overwhelming. It is important to remember all of us experience emotions, and for each of us, what we can cope with or how much we can cope with will vary. Factors that impact the size of our window of tolerance include.
Okay, so the factors that impact the size of our window of intolerance. Imagine you're dyslexic and you are trying to figure out what is in front of you. You also hate the noise of the child sitting next to you, constantly fidgeting in their chair. You've got something going on at home. Your window of tolerance is going to be pretty narrow. If you're constantly dealing with sensory issues, when I walked into the room today, I said to Fran, we have to turn the water cooler off. I cannot think with that water cooler on. My window of tolerance is extremely narrow at that point. So these are the things that we need to consider for the children and the students, that their ability to cope is based on a lot of things. Some of those are learned behaviours, some of those are environmental. There's lots and lots of factors. And if we could impact, if you see the jar there, can we take a couple of things out of that jar? Yeah, that is where the wobble chair comes in. If they wobble, can they cope a bit better? Yeah, fabulous. Do they need a movement break? These are all things we're going to explore as we go forward. But if we start to think about the differences between the students and their different windows of tolerance, then we're understanding what's going on underneath that iceberg. Now, we saw the top of the window of tolerance where we saw hyper arousal, and then we saw the bottom, which was hypoarousal. So flight and fight, those are our hyperarousal. Those are all those behaviors where they say they're rude, they're aggressive, they're fidgeting, they're doing this, they're doing that, because they're totally out of their window of tolerance. They're just reacting to what's going on around them. Or are they hypo? Are they rude because they're indifferent, or they can't think, or they are apparently lazy? These are the things that we can look at children, and less about the behaviour and more about their stress response. So I'll let you read through those. And all of these things today are just little drops for you to look at, and for you to look at what works for you and your students, and how you explain to your students and how you explain to your team about how you're going to respond to helping people emotionally regulate. Because ultimately, this stress here is somebody dysregulated. I'm dysregulated because I'm in fight mode. I'm dysregulated because I'm freezing and I just can't be bothered, and I've turned and I've shut down. Now, this is the flip brain model. This is another way that we look at our fight, flight, our emotional regulation. When our lid is flipped, we're dysregulated, 100%. I never, ever negotiate with a flip lid, right? I walk away, I give them space, I feel what they need in the moment. So if we look at here, this is our brainstem. This thumb here is our limbic system, and this is our prefrontal cortex. And when a baby grows, it grows like this, with the prefrontal cortex of their brain to be in the last to develop. Now, your prefrontal cortex that does all your thinking, or your reasoning, or your planning, or your reflection, or your regulation Some people say it doesn't actually finish developing till we're in our late 20s. Boys and girls develop differently at different rates. People develop differently if they have ASD, if they have ADHD, if they have a learning difficulty. Some parts of their brain are so developed, they're absolutely amazing. But in other ways, it's different layers, right? So when we're talking to students, it can be really helpful to explain about the flip lid, because then when the lid is flipped, we can refer back to it. So I always use the example of my children getting ready for school in the morning. And I say, put your shoes on. They haven't put their shoes on. My lid's down. I'm calm. I'm all right. I'm in my green zone. Put your shoes on. No shoes on. It's a minute before we need to go through the door. No shoes on. Put your shoes on. You know, you're doing the quiet, lips clenched. And then, I'm sorry to say I'm imperfect, and I lose it. And I say, put your shoes on. And I lose it. My lid is flipped. When I get in the car, I'm saying to them, maybe not when I get in the car, when I've calmed back down again, I'm saying, I'm sorry for shouting this morning. I don't know what came over me. I just wasn't thinking. I just felt really angry because my lid is flipped. Rationally, I don't want to shout at them about the shoes, but my lid was flipped because I was triggered, because the limbic system in the middle is our fight and flight, is our emotions, and is our feeling. So when children are saying, I don't want to go to school, I'm not going in, nobody's listening to me, I'd like to sit and just reflect for myself and give myself a moment, say, is their lid flipped? Because what we're saying at the moment, I'm not talking to this bit, I'm talking to this bit inside. So I often just give space, just psychological safety though. So we're still sitting in a safe space, but space to come down and then discuss it. So the person who talks about the flip lid is Dan Siegel. He's got tons of videos, and there's loads of resources online to learn about that.
Right. So I just want to come on to talk a bit about sensory processing disorder now. Having worked with young people with autism for a really long time, and the more I learn, the more I realise how much sensory processing and the way that children feel and process their senses has such a huge impact on their learning and the way that they present in school and at home. I think, you know, when I first started in inclusion a really, really long time ago, we would kind of pigeonhole children. We'd say, right, that child has autism, that child has ADHD, that child has dyslexia. And I think very much now, the more I learn and the more I know about children, is that you can tip all those boxes up, those neat little boxes that we used to put children into, and you can mash it all up. And so many children have so many different things, and their profile is very, very mixed. And for me, I think that sensory processing is one of the biggest things for our young people. Something like 90% of people with autism also have sensory processing disorder. So you can safely assume that if someone's got autism, they've got sensory processing challenges. But then, you know, lots of children who have ADHD are really impacted by sensory input, and people who are not, you know, I know myself, I'm really triggered by sensory things, particularly noise in the environment. I can't, if there's something noisy, or if there's somebody, I can't go to the cinema, because if there's somebody sitting 20 rows away at the back, that's all I can hear, rather than the thing that's got the noise and what's going on in front of me. So lots of people, and I think sensory processing is probably the biggest impactor on our young people. So I just want to show you this video because I really like this video. It explains it in such simple terms, and it explains it way better than I could. So it's just 2 minutes long. I really like this one. Often show this when I'm doing training for staff and for parents and things.
We have 8 senses. 5 you have probably heard of: sight, sound, smell, taste, and touch. And 3 that you may not be familiar with. The vestibular sense, sometimes known as the gravity or balance sense, allows us to move smoothly. It helps us with balance while we walk and run, and to stay upright when we sit and stand. Proprioception is the sense of self-movement, force, and body position. It is present in every muscle movement you have. Without proprioception, you wouldn't be able to move without thinking about your next step. Interoception helps you understand and feel what's going on inside your body. For example, when you're hungry, thirsty, in pain, or need the toilet. Imagine for each of our 8 senses we have a cup. And for us to feel regulated, each cup needs to be full. Each time we get some sensory input for one of our senses, it fills up the cup a little. For each sense, some of us have big cups and some of us have small cups. Imagine you have a small cup for sound. It fills up quickly with a little noise, and any more can feel overwhelming. Imagine you have a big cup for proprioception. You will need lots of movement to feel regulated. Understanding someone's sensory profile is really important in order to know what they need to feel, learn, and perform at their best.
So I'm wondering there if anybody, as they were listening to that, watching that, was thinking about children, young people that they've worked with, because I know every time I watch that, I do. And I think, you know, we have to remember that all of these children are very, very different. I really like the cup analogy. So if somebody was noise sensitive, their cup for noise would be very, very small. You know, they would be very, very triggered by small noises or by a small input of noise. Whereas, you know, somebody who has a large cup for, say, vestibular, they would need lots and lots of movement to make that cup full, because they need lots more sensory input to get them to get to that point. So if you have the child who's constantly on the move or constantly jumping and things like that, that's because their sensory cup for that particular area is larger than that of other children. So I hope people are starting to relate this to young people that they know and thinking, oh, that's why he does that, you know. I was going to say something else then and it's gone. No, it's gone. So just,
we have 8 senses.
Don't want you to start
5
again.
you have probably...
Yeah. So these are the 8 senses that were just described in this video there. And I think it's so interesting because we often think of children as just being noise sensitive or sensitive to smell, taste, things like that. But the other 3 senses are really big ones. They're all the kind of movement and other related ones that we don't typically think about or know about. And it's so important. If you think about and I've got some notes here that I can send out as well if you want me to, Catherine. But so the proprioceptive is also called kinesthesia, which is really, really interesting. And it's how we move around in time and space. And yeah, so examples of that would be being able to walk or kick without even looking at your feet, things like that. Being able to touch your nose without having your eyes open, things like that. So it's your awareness of your body in time and space. The interoception one, I don't know if anybody's ever worked with students who just seem to eat and never feel full. I've worked with young people on the spectrum who do that and they don't recognize when they're full. That's because they physically don't have the ability to do that. You know, their interoception, that sense is the cup is bigger and it takes them longer to realize, oh, I'm full. You know, or children who has the child who is, it's boiling hot, it's 45 degrees outside, yet they're still wearing their sweatshirt and their coat. You know, that's that one as well, because they don't have that ability to connect with the feelings of feeling hot, feeling cold, feeling tired, feeling hungry, things like that. Somebody just asked a question there. What was that? Sorry, Catherine, I just saw a question pop up and then it's disappeared. You're on mute, sorry. Is it down?
What of a situation where a child will say that they can hear noises in a quiet environment?
Yeah, I mean, you know, some children are so sensitive to noise and they will hear things that we can't hear, you know, and some children really struggle in spaces with absolute silence as well. In my experience, you know, I remember having a child back in the UK and we were in, I took them to a sports event. We were in this huge, big sports hall and there were children everywhere. It was really noisy. There, you know, we were playing sports and there were balls bouncing. There were kids yelling and shouting. And there was a little boy who just sat on the bench next to me and he completely zoned out from all of that. But he was like making this really strange noise and he kept looking behind him like that. And eventually I realized that there was a big sort of air conditioning fan behind him and it was making just a really, really, really quiet clicking noise, but that was all he could hear. So they just hear things sometimes completely differently to what you or I would. So if a child is telling you there's a noise, then maybe there is a noise, but it's maybe just a noise that you can't hear. Or maybe it's that they're struggling with absolute silence. You know, you can try different things like the ear defenders. Some of our students love the really big ear defenders. I've worked with kids in the past who like those. It completely, if you've ever tried them, it completely muffles the noise. They're fantastic. Some of the other kids can't tolerate those because it presses on their head too much, but you can try the ear loops, you know, the little ones that go around the ears. There are some children listen to music like the white noise, you know, if they're really struggling with absolute silence, the white noise apps and things like that can be really, really helpful for them. So it's just about thinking, you know, listening to them. If they're telling you they can hear a noise, if they're telling you that they're struggling with this, listen to them and try and work towards a solution with them. You know, what would you like to do? Would you like to try the ear defenders? Would you like to try music? You know, give them some options, let them try them and see what they can tolerate and what helps. Yeah, does that make sense? Does that answer the question? Yeah. So yeah, you can Google. There's lots more information on these different senses. There's a really lovely video that visual that I can also send out that I think is from Twinkle, and it has it's like a almost like a spectrum with different bits of the different senses and what their sensory seeking behavior might be like if they were under or oversensitive to different things. Okay, I'm just conscious of time, so I'm just going to. Yeah,
we've got a number of questions, Fran, but I think maybe we'll take them all at the end. So
yeah, that's a good idea, and then we know how much time we've got left. Yeah, that's perfect. Okay, so when a child is sort of overstimulated by sensory information, sometimes we can link it back to that fight or flight. We can see different reactions in our young people, but these are some of the common ones that you might see. So external sounds of sensory overload, they might just get a wave of absolute exhaustion. And if you're really overstimulated by things, if you've, you know, yourself, if you've been, I don't know, somewhere where you've been running around and it's been noisy, you feel exhausted afterwards because it's difficult trying to process all of that, isn't it? And that's what our young people are like. You know, often when you chat to parents and they'll say, you know, and you'll say about the child, oh, they're really quiet in school and they're this and they're that, and then the mum says, well, as soon as they get in the car, you know, it's like the lid coming off the lemonade bottle, and you get that explosive reaction. And that's almost because they've been keeping it under all day, and then you know, and they're exhausted, and then you might just get that big reaction. You might get them that are just absolutely exhausted when they get home from school. You might get the stimming behavior. So the stimming is repetitive movements that children do to try and comfort and regulate themselves. I've had children in the past who sort of do this with their fingers. There are lots of different, you know, the hair twirling can be stimming. We do that sometimes as adults, don't we, when we feel overstimulated and we might know something to help us to calm down. That's what that is. Sense of panic, so going back to fight or flight, that desire to escape. I don't know if any of you have children who run, and that is just that this is too much, I need to get out of here. And instead of thinking, you know, looking at disciplining the child or for running, we've got to think, well, what was it that they needed to get away from at that moment in time? What was too much for them? They just needed to get out. We do get young people who that's all they know. They just need to get out of there, and they need to get out of there now. You might see children who cover their eyes, cover in the ears is a common one that I've seen. Children who stick their fingers in their ears. You know, that's a really visual and really quick way to tell you this is too loud. You know, it's not necessarily I don't want to listen to you, it's I can't take any more of this, I need to block my ears. Really irritable, so going back to the flip lid thing, you know, that's we can see that in children when they've had too much sensory input. Restlessness, discomfort, you know, and we need to be looking at the behavior that we're seeing. Think back to the iceberg, you know, we're seeing this on the top, but why is that? What's going on under the surface, and what can we do to try and help that young person in that moment who's feeling really, really overwhelmed? You know, why are they feeling overwhelmed? What can we do to help them with that, and what can we do to prevent that in the future, that sort of feeling overwhelmedness? Right. So what causes that behavior then? So sensory processing disorder can also be referred to as sensory integration dysfunction, or SI dysfunction. So this is when the nervous system is receiving messages from your senses and converting them into motor and behavioral responses. And in sensory processing disorder, the signals aren't directed or organized into appropriate responses, and it can create challenges in in just the simplest everyday tasks, really. So the classroom can be really, really challenging for these young people. So it's the input, and then it's not quite processed correctly in the brain, and then the output can be the reaction that we see, that dysregulation. Okay, so and each individual is different. So think back to the cups. Each person's sensory profile is really, really different. What one child can tolerate, another child might not be able to tolerate at all, might have a really, really low tolerance of that thing. And I think Kate mentioned this earlier about hyper and hypersensitivity to things. So if somebody is hypersensitive to something, that means they're overstimulated by it. So they can only tolerate, they would have a small cup for that thing. And if they're hypersensitive, then they would have quite a big cup for that thing, and it might take them quite a long time to fill up that sensory cup. There's a little what's it called, simulation there, a sensory overload simulation. I won't show you that now, but that will be on the slides afterwards for people. It's a boy walking through a shopping centre, and it just gives you a bit of insight into what just the most basic of things going in a shopping centre might be like for a child with sensory processing challenges. Right, this is back to you.
So we're kind of going through a checklist, aren't we, of what's going on underneath our iceberg. Are the sensory processing needs, and how is that making them feel? So we've got a child that's nervous to go in an exam. They've got to do the exam. So we can put things in place. We can put them in another room. We can allow them breaks. We can have a reader. All of those things will manage their sensory issues and the anxiety. But part of anxiety is riding the wave, is managing the inevitable distress of having an exam. You've got to have the exam. We have to face stress. It's good for us. It's transformative, but we have to ride that wave of those big emotions. So if we've got somebody going into an exam and we want them to ride the wave of that stress, it literally means sitting with it, not taking the exam away. We can't do that sometimes. So we have to sit with it. So working with them to build their resilience, talking to them about how they handled a difficult situation another time. And I know, throughout the people on this call, there'll be a lot of different degrees of needs in terms of inclusion. So you have to make this appropriate to the children that you're working with. For some of your children, it might be simply going into a different area, interacting with other students, eating a new kind of food, but it's about them helping them to tolerate it and move through the challenges and the challenges that they want to move through. Do they always want to eat beige food the rest of their life? Maybe that's their choice. Or maybe they would really like to try this new food, or really like to conquer this part of this subject, or sit in this place. It really depends on the child. And I think the thing to know about this is, as well, everything that Fran and I have said depends on connection. And that's really where I come in, because I have the privilege and the time to spend with the students, getting to know them. And maybe we don't all have that all of the time, but we can't figure out what's going on underneath the iceberg if we don't know the child at all. Now, this is a little bit about emotionally, I think it's called emotionally based school refusal or school avoidance. So that's when children don't want to go to lesson, they don't want to come to school, they don't want to do certain things, they're running away. I'm sure everybody deals with students that experience that. So this is a little bit about anxiety and avoidance. So this is the worry cycle. I'm scared to do my presentation, escape, I'll stay home instead of doing it. This reinforces the idea that I shouldn't do tough things, that things feel better. But then what happens? We get more avoidance and they don't do the presentation and it builds up. I get children who don't want to come to school. So I'm not coming in today, I'm not coming in today. Well, what about tomorrow? The short-term gratification just leads to long-term reinforcement. So when we're helping children to ride the wave, it's really important that we notice where the peak of their anxiety is and try to help them to not avoid. Or we do it really gently. So I know you're really afraid to come into school. I hold my hands up and I negotiate sometimes. I negotiate a half a day off if you come in for 2 weeks. I negotiate lots of different things. Sometimes some children, it's just enough to say, but if you don't come in today, you're going to be sitting at home and it's going to be really hard tomorrow. Come in today and sit with me for a little bit. Get them into their lessons, reinforce the fact that they rode that wave, they got through it, and they can do hard things. This is all about teaching resilience and letting them know that they really can do hard things. And it works at every level. Even for non-verbal students, we can show them with our expressions and our body language and our physical presence, how we believe in them, how we have warmth towards them. It's really important that we, in terms of emotional regulation, show them how to get over hard things and ride the wave. So, Fran is going to talk more about things we use in the classroom for students who are struggling with SPD and emotional regulation. But this is, for me, the source of self-regulation, which is co-regulation. And I've got other slides that say you can't, a dysregulated adult can't regulate a dysregulated child. In order for the child to regulate, you have to be regulated. So this is kind of the basis of how we mirror. It works on a lot of it leans on a lot of attachment theory, and this video can be a little bit tough to watch for some, but it's really important that we think about how our children have been regulated at home and why it's so hard for them to regulate themselves.
Babies this young are extremely responsive to the emotions and the reactivity and the social interaction that they get from the world around them. This is something that we started studying 30, 40 years ago, when people didn't think that infants could engage in social interaction. In the still face experiment, what the mother did was she sits down and she's playing with her baby who's about a year of age.
I'm like a girl. Oh.
And she gives a greeting to the baby gives a greeting back to her.
Yeah.
This baby starts pointing at different places in the world, and the mother's trying to engage her and play with her. They're working to coordinate their emotions and their intentions, what they want to do in the world. And that's really what the baby is used to. And then we ask the mother to not respond to the baby. The baby very quickly picks up on this, and then she uses all of her abilities to try and get the mother back. She smiles at the mother. She points because she's used to the mother looking where she points. The baby puts both hands up in front of her and says, "What's happening here?" She makes that screechy sound at the mother, like, come on, why aren't we doing this? Even in this 2 minutes, when they don't get the normal reaction, they react with negative emotions, they turn away, they feel the stress of it, they actually may lose control of their posture because of the stress that they're experiencing.
Oh, yes. Oh, would be girl.
It's a little like the good, the bad, and the ugly. The good is that normal stuff that goes on, that we all do with our kids. The bad is when something bad happens, but the infant can overcome it. After all, when you stop the still face, the mother and the baby start to play again. The ugly is when you don't give the child any chance to get back to the good. There's no reparation, and they're stuck in that really ugly situation. Babies this young are extremely responsive.
So we talk about ACEs. We talk about ACEs that impact learning needs and behavioural issues. A child that every time mom feeds them, she's distant. Maybe the nanny only feeds them. Maybe mom's going through something. No judgment on moms. Moms are just trying their best. You know, this is what they're experiencing. They're building their own self-concept from the way mom responds to them. How the baby feels is shown on the mom's face. The mom is the translator for the baby's feelings, and moms still are translators for their children's feelings, even as teens. If a teen says, I'm really upset, I can't do it, and the mom says, yes, you should be really upset, I don't think you can do it, that's what the child's going to believe. And what was interesting about the baby with a very mushy prefrontal cortex is that she actually lost control of her body, because that is how inherently it impacts them. So when we're working with children, the reason I put that there, I usually put that right at the start to learn about how the brain builds and how warmth and connection is really needed. But the reason I put that there is because this shows us how we should regulate with children, how we connect with them. If a child's saying, I don't want to come to school, but you're saying, I hear you, you don't want to come to school, you're really angry, that sounds really, really difficult. You're co-regulating with that child. You can still be boundaried, and you can still be warm, and you can still be firm. At BSEC, they talk about being warm demanders as teachers, and I really echo that. For example, today I said, I really hear that you don't want to come to school. I cannot stand outside in 40-degree heat. I cannot. This is my boundary right now, but I really hear how hard this is. Can we go inside? Validated, reflect, listen, mirror the body language. When I have autistic children or children with autism, apologies, that are stimming, I'll stim with them. And they look a bit like, oh, look at her, she's stimming with me. And we all have a little stim together, because I'm just validating how they feel, how they're calming. So co-regulation is super important. This is just a little bit of a visual on how a regulated adult can regulate a child, but a dysregulated adult will never regulate a child. So my top tip for this is take a moment. If you need another adult in the room, you should be able to get that. If you're to the point where you feel angry, you feel triggered, you feel like you're going to flip your lid, we have to acknowledge that we feel like that. Our jobs are very stressful. We work with some of the most complex issues. We need to take a moment to regulate, so then we can come back with our best selves and help to regulate the child. And so this was a little bit that I just wanted to put in. There's another layer to this, which is cognitive regulation. Now, the cognitive regulation is about knowing your beliefs, your thoughts. Like if we talk about CBT, we talk about negative automatic thoughts, and knowing, oh, I'm catastrophizing. Oh, I'm seeing this one way, but actually there are other ways to see this. Oh, there's no evidence to support my thought. And I really like this visual, because somebody with a sensory issue cannot cognitively regulate. If the noise is too loud, how on earth are they supposed to calm their thoughts, be present, be mindful about what's going on? So if we can regulate their senses through the wobbles, the fidgets, we can regulate their emotions through the distress and riding the wave, and then we can regulate their behavior by being present with them, connecting with them, hearing what they're saying. And then sometime afterwards, when they're calm, when their lids aren't flipped, saying, what do you think about that now? What should we do next time? And then we can move through. And sometimes we can be cognitively dysregulated in terms of our anxiety. Our beliefs and our thoughts about what is going to happen is completely taken us over. And then we start to feel funny in our bodies. We can work the other way. But I think it's really important to notice the steps and the layers. We're not just heads with bodies dangling below. We're one complete being. Our thoughts, our feelings, our bodies, our emotions, they sit within all of us. So this is the why, this is below the surface.
Thank you. And I think the most important thing sort of for teachers and inclusion practitioners is that we think about some strategies and some preventative type stuff. So when we see that children get really dysregulated, what we try to think about what's going on under that iceberg, try to work backwards and see if you can see what's triggered that behavior. And then what we try and do is to put some strategies in to help them to try and prevent that from happening. So if they're really dysregulated because they're in a noisy environment, can we give them the ear defenders that help them to be in that environment but not be triggered by it? You know, if they need movement, I went to get earlier my little movement break cards. These are really, really useful. So we have, and what we work towards with our young people is that they can initially they might not be able to see or feel that they need a movement break, but we work towards helping them recognize that, so that eventually they're asking for that independently. And they might not be able to do that verbally, but we have, like, I've got like a little brain break one and a movement break one. So if the child doesn't even want to speak, that can just be placed on their desk, on the teacher's desk. They can develop signals and things between them and the teacher, so that the teacher knows, I need to go for a movement break. I think, yeah, so that's there, the non-verbal signals, sufficient breaks to help them refocus, to optimize learning, facilitate the consistency in routines, rules and boundaries, give any advance warning of routine changes. Our young people really like consistency. They like predictability. They like those lessons where they go and they know exactly what those teachers' expectations are going to be, because they're always the same. So when we go to the maths lesson, we always go in and we always do a bit of a game on the whiteboard in the beginning. Then the teacher always talks and introduces something, and then we always have some independent work. If a lesson can follow that predictable structure, that will reduce anxiety for that child before they've even got to the classroom, because if they don't know what to expect, they're coming in already anxious, already in that orange zone rather than the green zone. Reduce the need for handwriting if we can, allow extra time for things. Where's my slide there? To accommodate motor skills, fatigue and trouble with proprioception. So it's just these things, and it's about really getting to know our young people, getting to know our students, having that relationship with them. And sometimes you just need to sit back and watch them, and when you sit back and watch, you can see, oh gosh, he's really triggered by that child there, or by that thing there, or by that thing on the whiteboard. We're lucky sometimes as being inclusion practitioners, where we can go into the classroom and just really zone in on one child, watch what's going on and try and unpick, why is it they're having particular problems in this lesson, or with this teacher, or with this, this particular thing. So I think that's really, really important, that we just get to know our young people. We watch them, we learn, we see what's triggering them, and we have those relationships with them, because some of them obviously will be able to verbalize that for you, and it's really important that we hear their voice. Letting them use inclusive software, speech to text or Chromebooks. A lot of our kids now, they want to type. They hate writing. It's a real trigger for them. They find it slow, they find it laborious, their coordination's maybe not as good. So we let them use their Chromebook. That's one of their accommodations. Pencil grippers, things like that, highlighters, sticky notes, just little tactics, little things, little tricks you can give them. Quiet spaces, minimizing the distractions, supporting personal space between students. Some people will really like to be in their own little space. Don't make them be in part of the class. If they want to sit at the back, if they'd rather sit at the front, if they'd rather sit at the side, simple things just like positioning in the classroom to put them away from the things that trigger them can be really helpful. The fidget toys are great. That can help them to regulate in the classroom so that they don't get up to that point. I don't know if any of you have ever seen the weighted, there are weighted lap pads, there are weighted vests, there are weighted blankets. They're amazing, really, really heavy. But some children who like that sort of deep pressure will, that it might be that you timetable in some time for them to go and have some sensory input. And it's important that they get that sensory input, not when they're up there, but to prevent them from getting up there. If they really need to come and have some sensory time for 5 minutes because they're overstimulated at the end of playtime, or they'll, and then they'll go into the classroom and the cup will tip over, then that's what we do. And we've already mentioned the noise sensitive stuff as well. That was the last one. What were we going to say on that one? I can't remember. Oh, we were going to take that one off and we forgot.
I suppose all of these things are probably things that you all already know, like my little thing. I said an autistic person, we say someone with autism. I just wanted to share that educating others about attachment, about the brain and things like that is really important. And the longer I've been here, it's almost like sometimes I'm speaking another language, especially with things like messy play and non-directive work with students. We do messy play groups in primary, and it's been really difficult to, it's not been difficult, but it's taken a lot of work to educate people on why we need to do non-directive things. So, but it is feeling worthwhile when teachers are saying, well, now I don't just look at a student like that. I try to see what's going on underneath. We celebrate authenticity, which can be really hard, especially in a British school where we've got uniforms and things like that. But the biggest thing I wanted to say was about support and empower, not solve. We don't want to rescue anybody. We need to empower people. The most important question we should ask when we're working with our young people around sensory processing and emotional regulation is, what do you want? What would make this better? how can I help? Not, you need to do this, you need to do that. What do you want? What do you need? What do you need from me? Okay. And these are just the links to the different papers we've used. Inner World Work is the page for the flipped lid. Beacon House is a trauma-informed practice in the UK that has lots and lots of lovely trauma-informed free resources and paid courses. We've worked personally with IntraQuest in the UK with our Messy Play. They do lots of lovely we did a play-based attachment work course where we're going to become accredited. So lots and lots of resources, and please feel free to contact us if you need anything further. And I think that's it from me. Thank you so much for listening.
We've thrown a lot at you there. Hopefully it was useful.
Yes.
Yeah, there was a lot, but it was really, really interesting. And it's so interesting to see how well it's working for you guys, because it gives us all kind of insight and hope into applying it here, because we are in a very different situation here, aren't we, from the UK and Ireland. Okay, we've got a few questions on the chat. We've got quite a number, actually. So Betty, I'm sorry if I'm butchering your name. What if a situation where a child says, oh, we've asked this one. Okay, Salini, what if a child is not able to smell things, either pleasant or unpleasant? So that sounds like possibly a physical impairment rather than maybe a sensory need, because unless there's it could be sensory, but usually that sounds like a physical impairment. Maybe they've had a cold, maybe they've had COVID. Some people lose their sense of smell following COVID. Have you ladies come across that?
I lost my sense of smell and taste after I had COVID for around 6 months, actually. And when we looked into it, there's a name for it. It was something, it's smell amnesia, basically. And you have to retrain your brain to be able to smell things. So I got lots of essential oils at home that were really contrasting smells, and just did one for a minute and then another one really. So I had like something maybe really sweet, such as rose water, then something really strong like tea tree oil or something, and I had to smell the contrasting smells. Whether it helped or not, I don't know. I got my smell and my taste back eventually, but like you said, it could be some physical thing. It could be, has that child had a head injury or some other reason? You would need to know why that was happening. Yeah.
There's another one here from Clarice. What if a child has a sensory need and they are rubbing laminated letters all day or numbers? They can spend the whole day feeling laminated letters or numbers. That sounds like a hyposensitivity, doesn't it? Where they're seeking sensory.
I would let them do it.
I would say, where is the issue with that?
Yeah, give them a little pocket of laminated letters that they're allowed to rub.
Yeah.
You know? Why not?
And maybe mix it up, try them out with sandpaper letters, maybe give them some Play-Doh, see what they like. Yeah, why not? Nilangela, I've worked with a child 10 years old experiencing proprioceptive and vestibular challenges, starting with fear of buttons and zips, later identified with SPD, leading to affected speech fluently in independent walking. OT and SI therapy helped her development partial tolerance, and we've accommodated her in school similar. Maybe she's kind of answering the sensory question for it. Okay. Okay, Salini, if we have discomfort for a few days after cutting nails, what can be done? Maybe don't cut them so short.
Yes.
That sounds like it's too short, maybe. Lots of kids.
Maybe it's really painful. Maybe the cutting of the nails, it's too painful because it's too close to the skin. You know,
could be.
Yeah.
And some kids really hate, like, even it doesn't, whether you're neurotypical or not, a lot of kids hate getting their nails cut. And then what can we do when a child with ASD screams in class and may have meltdowns?
We need to work out why they're screaming in class and why they're having the meltdown. What is it that's triggering that behavior? So often children with ASD, their communication, they can't communicate to you what it is that's triggering them. Maybe they don't even know what's triggering them. And that's what I said before, if you step back and you look at that individual, can you watch them in that environment? Do they come into the classroom calm? You know, what is it that's making them so heightened? And it's about just watching the behavior and trying to figure out what the triggers are. you know, when they're screaming, what is it that they scream at? Do they scream at a person, at a thing? Is it that one of the sensory cups is it? For me, it would be about observing the child, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
And working with the teacher to try and figure out what is it that's tipping the child to that point where they feel like they need to scream. And
I don't know if somebody just said that child was non-verbal.
Non-verbal.
If that
Yeah.
child's non-verbal, I would say observation, do a record of when they're screaming and why, what's happening at home, what are they eating in the morning, what are they wearing, really, really close observation for a number of days where you don't intervene and just see what is happening and try to get down to that trigger.
I use the STAR method, where you look at stimulus, trigger, action, and reaction, and you note those four for every time it happens over a few days. And be mindful as well. Does it happen before lunch often? Maybe the child is tired, maybe they're hungry, maybe they're ill. So there are things to note at what times it kind of happens the most. Okay, I have a student who said, this is Nilantha. I have a student who used to say bad words, but he didn't mean to say it. I told him there are bad words, but he doesn't understand. What could I do for this?
I would provide alternative words. Like, you know, we have a student who, when he gets very heightened, he uses bad words. So we've let him come up with an alternative list of words that he's allowed to use, you know, like make them up together, make them fun, you know. It's that it's giving, I think with behavior like this, it's always what they're doing, that they need an outlet, don't they? So you can't just say to them, don't do that. You've got to provide them with an alternative outlet that's a suitable outlet, haven't you? That behavior is not going to go away if they're triggered by a particular thing. I just saw somebody mention, what about pinching and hitting? Are they doing that because that's a sensory thing that they want to physically pinch like that? In which case I would give them something like Blue Tack or the Theraputty or something like that to pinch. Or are they doing that to get your attention? Like they've learned that if I pinched, you go ow and you look at them straight away. Is it an attention-seeking behaviour? It's you know, it's about figuring out where it comes from, isn't it?
On Beacon House, there's a lovely handout called the truncated response. So that is when a child will experience physical discipline at home, and because they weren't able to fight back, the fight-flight response sits within their body because trauma sits within our body. So if we've got children at school that are aggressive, that's number one, alert behaviour and an indicator of what might be happening at home. So for children like that, even if there's improvement in what's going on at home, physical activity, wrestling, grappling, basketball, anything you can get them into that's physical, that can get out the frustration of what's happened to them, is really, really positive. But again, are they non-verbal and doing it for stimulation? Is it a social thing? There's so many layers to unpick.
I used to work with a girl in the UK who was deaf, and she had learned, obviously, she used to pinch all the children around her. And actually, when you watched her, she was pinching because they were too close to her, and she couldn't say, move away from me. But if she pinched, she learned that nobody then wanted to sit near her, you know. And it was just about figuring that out. And you can only, you know, we're not going to be able to answer those really specific questions right now because we don't know the child and we haven't seen the child and the behavior. But it's just about having time to watch them, to understand and try and figure out, I think, what their triggers are, number one, and number two, what are they trying to communicate with that behavior? What are they indirectly asking for, you know?
I'm cognizant of time and we're still getting questions in. So if I could ask, guys, if you have questions, pop us a post on LinkedIn and tag us in it. So it's Fran Marshall, Kate Lewis, or myself, and we can answer on LinkedIn. Or you can directly email on info. I've put our email at the top of the messages today. So for today, we're going to close the session, and thank you so much, ladies. You've clearly stimulated a lot of inquiry, and there's so many people saying thank you and loads of smiles and thumbs up and everything. So really wonderful session, and I'd love to have you guys back again sometime soon in the future. Thank you so much for your time, and we had over 90 people attending today, so that's awesome.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for asking us, and thanks for listening, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.